Hello, my name is Bob Carroll, the Executive Vice President of Permanent Solutions Labor Consultants, and your host of today's episode of PSLabor Talk. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Ricardo Torres, our President and CEO here at Permanent Solutions Labor Consultants. Ricardo is also a former high level union official, and between his many years on the union side and many years working exclusively with management, he brings a wealth of knowledge to our topics of discussion. I'm also joined by Doug Grima, a former UAW president at Local 174, which happens to be former home of Walter Reuther and one of, if not the largest, amalgamated local unions in the UAW. Along with Doug, I also have Stefan Sestina. Stefan has served in many roles in high level executive positions, many different types of companies, varying from tier one automotive, the glass industry, and many more. And as we talk today about the UAW and the fiasco that happened, wouldn't really call it a fiasco. The union lost, but we saw it coming. It wasn't the hardest fought campaign we've ever seen. We did see mistakes being made throughout the campaign. And frankly, both sides didn't put up the biggest fight there. And you can bet right now that the unions are back in their war rooms and they are reevaluating their positions and their plans in order to reach their goal of organizing a foreign transplant company down in the South. We're certainly not here today promoting the union, but it is very wise for members of management and executives to look at what happened down there and learn what to expect in the near future. This will be a two-part podcast. We're going to talk about the UAW, and we're also going to talk about contract negotiations and some of the mistakes that we see in negotiations throughout the country. Our hope today is to give members of management, human resources, and business executives more knowledge to use when going against the union so that they can be better prepared. My name's Bob Carroll, and welcome to today's episode of PSLabor Talk.
So last Friday, the UAW suffered what I think we all would consider a enormous loss down in Canton, Mississippi. And today we want to talk about what exactly went wrong with the UAW down there. So I'll start with Rick. You had some insight you were sharing with me on some of the mistakes that you think they made. And I think you would agree that they were pretty colossal mistakes.
Well, they made a lot of mistakes. I think everything that they did. I mean, one of the first things that they did, they were fighting last decade's organizing campaigns. In the wrong decade. I mean, first of all, they went with they made it a civil rights campaign. They were they how they allocated their resources. They used staff people from around the country. First of all, big mistake. First of all, staff people are very expensive. They don't have any conception about what these workers. Most of them don't have any conception about what these workers are doing. The issues they did a lot of standoffish things. They did a lot of marches. They did. I mean, that's not what drives workers to vote for the union. It's got to be hardcore, issue related, locally related things that make workers want to join a union. And the main thing is what they want is to have a more powerful position within the company. And you have to give them ownership of it. And due to just the fact that they got a thorough butt kicking, I mean, let's face it, it was a complete failure on the UAW's part. They didn't have people embedded. They didn't have people dedicated. The workers didn't have skin in the game, a majority of them, because they went to an election not knowing what the numbers were going to be. So it's just the basic conception of how you run an organizing campaign that they messed up right from the get.
And they were making, what, $25 an hour? Which down in Mississippi, $25 an hour is a pretty comfortable wage. And I think what you just said, that they made it a civil rights movement. I mean, they didn't have much to stand on as far as wages go. Doug, you, as Rick put it earlier, you were part of this losing union.
Well, let me say this first of all. Anytime, and you know this, Doug, and you know the UAW. Doug had the largest, at the time, the largest amalgamated local in the UAW. What about 7,000 members, right, Doug?
Yeah, 7,000 plus.
First of all, anytime you make an organizing campaign about money, I mean, there's always an issue, but being the driving issue behind an organizing campaign is the biggest mistake. One-on-one union organizing. If it's about money, you walk away. If that's all it's about. You know, it's an issue, but if it's a driving issue, you have nothing.
Correct. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rick. It's not about money. The companies today, they compete very, very well with wages. It's about taking ownership, as you said earlier. Well, you don't want to make it about money. You don't want a staff member, as Rick pointed out eloquently about this Nissan drive. The mistakes they made were colossal, and I'm surprised that they did what they did, because these are last decade before. That's how they used to do their organizing. You got to, because their staff members are usually staff members are usually people that never spent the time in a plant. They didn't work. They don't know the issues. They don't know how to approach somebody one-on-one to discuss their issues. It's not about a staff. It's about the issues from the guy working at Nissan, working in a plant, working on that floor. It's about them. It's not about the UAW. It's about the guys that they're looking to organize.
You know, Doug, and I tell you what, Doug, Stefan, anytime you rely on the organizers to drive the message, the organizers are there to help run the campaign, but when the organizers are driving the messages to the workers on the floor, and I'm not talking about the organizing committees, the internal organizing committees, I'm talking about the people on the floor, the people that you're trying to convince. When you have it, when it's the staff people or the organizing driving that, then you don't have the internal strength and ownership of the campaign. It's the workers themselves who have to be talking to each other. When a staff, first of all, staff also, they're used to delegating. They're not, they're used to going in and doing whatever they have to do, and they delegate everything else. So right. They're the worst people. They needed to have people who understood the issues, and they had to have the issues being driven by the workers themselves. And first and second of all, doing that traditional organizing campaign with what? How many people was it? 3,700 people. I mean, there's no way that you can keep track of that. If they were smart, they would have broke it down into small groups, and that each group managed themselves to where it was controllable, to where you knew what was going on, to where they could police each other and know where the dynamics were going within each group. That way they could have controlled it, but they never did any of those basic things.
And they've made this mistake over and over, and I don't know how many more times they're going to make this mistake until they realize, like you said, Rick, it's break it down into manageable groups. Break it down. And it's the guy on the floor. You want the guy on the floor to do the one-on-ones with his own people. If you have to have an organizing committee to try and convince them, you already lost. You've already lost.
Well, no, yeah, absolutely. But the internal organizing committee is what I was referring to.
Yeah.
The internal organizing committee is a makeup of the workers themselves who, help drive the message. Once again, but it's got to be, the emotion has to be there. The workers have to have skin in the game. They have to care. You have to make it their campaign. They have to take ownership of it. Because if they don't have ownership of it, then they don't care. It goes this way, it goes that way. The next day they're going to go on with their lives. It doesn't matter. They have to be so embedded to where they have to win. They feel the drive, the need, the energy that they have to win. And if they don't win, they don't know how they're going to wake up the next day and shave, because they won't be able to look at themselves in the mirror. And that's the emotional energy I'm talking about. And it has to be a cohesive group that spreads that message throughout the workforce. And you can't do it 3,700 people, top-down organizing. It's got to be centralized organizing. And this is the mistake what the UAW has been making, and unions have been making across the country. In fact, when I read about the results of the organizing campaign In fact, Doug, I called you.
Yes.
Because I was surprised because I know Richard Bensinger was the organizing director for a while in there, and he
Right.
comes from the AFL-CIO. He was the organizing director under Sweeney, and I worked with him, and we actually built nationwide strategies, advanced strategies on organizing, and he was always a very aggressive. As far as organizing, as far as discipline, as far as strategy, he was always very, very smart. And when I read that, I said, man, that's why I called you, Doug. And I said, hey, is Bensinger still there? Because, he
Right.
must be having some kind of breakdown because if he ran this campaign and this was under his department, man, he ought to just retire because he lost it.
Right. And you're right, Rick. I agree. And the problem is when you get a new regime come in, as when Bob King left, Bob King's men go with him. I mean, because the new incoming president, Dennis Williams, says, well, Rick, you did a nice job, but now I'm bringing my own guy in. Now this guy's going in a different direction. As you said, Bensinger, he has very well equipped on how to run campaigns. You have these other guys, the current organizing director there, Mark Haas, his strategies are obviously different. So you now you're going in a different direction. So now I think you need to keep the UAW and some of these other unions. They need to keep the same strategy. And this is where I think they make the wrong moves and the wrong strategies, and this is where they lose it because you had Rick working for, like I said, with Bob King when he was there, and his strategies were different than what Mark's are.
Well, I think also one of the most important things here is that these guys couldn't count. Yeah, I think what happened is they announced that they were going to vote, filed the petition. There was so much stuff in the media that they really didn't have a choice but to move forward with it. But they should never have filed that petition in the first place with the numbers they had, right?
Oh, absolutely not. You're right.
Well, I don't even know what numbers that they had. Did you hear anything?
No,
about
I haven't heard any numbers either, but I think they lost true focus and then go back to basic organizing strengths, which they have. They didn't use their own data internally of where their success was. And as you mentioned earlier about the smaller groups, unless you have the inside committees within each their own departments, they have a leader for each of that department. You have people contacting people, trying to find out the true issues. I think they missed the boat on that. I think they focused more on economics than on the true issues, whether it was safety, treatment of one another, the respect for one another. And I think they missed the boat on that. And if you don't break it down to smaller groups, we have better control and have actual count. I don't know if they visited homes, that they have lead committees. It sounds like they just didn't go down to the basics.
Well, go ahead, Doug.
No, I totally agree with you, Stefan. They just didn't do the basic. They concentrated on the finances, the financial part of it, as Rick and Bob mentioned, and that was not the way to go. These guys are making good money. It's not about the money. It's not about the money. It's always, that's never the issue. Really isn't. It shouldn't be an issue in the organizing drive. It's about something else. How we're getting treated in the plant. How are we being taken seriously? We got too many temps here. We need full-time workers. We need help doing this stuff. These are issues. The respect in the plant. I've heard about the respect in a lot of organizing drives, but it's not about the finances. If it's all about that, then you really have nothing to work with there.
Well, I tell you, to me, the UAW is coming off looking a little bit desperate right now. If you remember Bob King, back when he was president, he made the statement that they needed to organize a transplant company to survive. They lost the vote in Volkswagen and thought maybe they had a bit of teeth in the Nissan vote, and obviously they didn't. And they ended up putting themselves into a corner, if you will, to where they only really had one play left, and that was to start to smear the company. I mean, the statement that Williams made saying that Nissan could not win on facts and started a negative campaign, to me, it really wasn't as negative as what we've seen in the past by any means. In fact, one of the quotes that were out there was that this was the nastiest anti-union campaign in modern history of the American labor movement. To me, that's bunk, because We've seen a lot worse.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a joke. That's a joke. Well, the thing about it is what's funny is that actually Nissan didn't run that great of a campaign either, but they didn't need to. I mean, they both went. You had the UAW going out, marching and marching on dealerships and doing everything to try to bring public sedative to the
Right.
game. I mean,
Right.
and strikes that works a lot, and it can if you do it effective, but to make it a main strategy, it's not a smart move. You have to keep your head down, and you have to go and just work one-on-one with the workers, and as I stated earlier, in smaller groups. But Nissan did the same thing. They were looking at how the public was going to perceive this, instead of really coming down and working, and talking with the workers and communicating with the workers. I just think that everything that they did was just way off. I think it was a weak campaign on both sides. I think that the UAW did get desperate. I mean, I don't know what numbers they were reading or what people they were talking to, but obviously either, there's no way they would have taken it. I don't think even the UAW would have taken it to a vote if they knew that they were going to get, it just doesn't. It's just not logical. It makes no sense.
Oh
at
yeah,
all.
no, they would never have done that. You're right. I bet you, like I said, Benziger, he would never have. He would have withdrew that. I would have put money that he would have withdrew, and he would have spent more time in the campaign and working the trenches, and doing the one-on-ones, and that's where you get it. When you get this data, I don't know where they got it from, and I don't know who gave it to them, but they got some bad information back, and. This was not gonna fly. They both, like you said, Rick, they both ran terrible campaigns on both sides. It's just that who put a little bit more effort and better results in it. Obviously, management did.
Well, and I think it all comes down to this: is that they didn't have the buy-in from the workers themselves.
Right.
And I'm not here, and we're not here collectively to teach the UAW how to organize.
No,
We're not trying to help them out. But there's just to dissect. This is an issue, and that once again, having the numbers and having multiple people do it. I remember when I was an organizing director, and we had in my department we had campaigns all across the country, and we dissected every department, every worker. We knew what was going on. We had it. And it had to be tight. If someone was a pro-union person or on the fence or pro, any movement or any talking or any placement on our at the time definition of where these workers stood had to be backed up with facts. It had to be backed. Why are they? Why do you?
Right.
That? It had to be challenged. And they're not. It seems like they're not doing that. They get people that are just putting whatever information that they want, and people were misleading them. And if they had a true internal organizing committee, that never would have happened.
No, I totally agree with you on that, Rick. If they had a true internal committee, you would not have seen those. You're absolutely correct. And I think Bob made a good statement there about what Bob King said about if the UAW is going to survive, they need to organize a transplant. I think it was a silly statement to come out and say.
Never openly talk about your weaknesses.
That's correct. I mean, I would never do that. That would be the worst thing to do. Now as Bob put it, he painted the UAW, put them in a corner.
Yeah.
So now I think what it is, Rick, they feel the pressure in the UAW to organize, and they thought that their best bet was to Nissan plant, and I think that strategy would totally win.
Well, the thing about this is the third time there. They should have known. In fact, they should have had. They went there, they pulled out completely. Went there, they pulled out completely, and then went there again. If their long-term strategy is to eventually organize Nissan, then they're going to have a presence there. But the thing about it is that one of the things that surprised me. In fact, it doesn't surprise me that the UAW is in this situation. Years ago, I was on a committee when the machinists, the UAW, and the steelworkers were going to merge years ago,
Yes.
back in the late
Yes.
90s. You
Yeah.
remember that, Doug?
Oh, absolutely.
And I was on the committee putting that together, and that
Yeah.
was the hardest thing in the world to do because you had egos, but they were
Steve
flying
Jokic.
high, and they were flying high, man. They were flying high.
Steve
yeah.
Jokic, the president of the UAW, he had the biggest ego. I
Yeah.
mean, he wanted to be the supreme being, and
They all did.
They all did.
They all did, Doug.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is that that's one thing that Ben Singer and I tried to do years ago over at the George Meany Labor Institute is we tried to put in, and we came up with a plan. We came up with a strategy. We came up with a program to bring up the standards, to standardize organizing campaigns. And this is before the AFL CIO was separated. Now we have to change the WIN
Right.
group also. But we try to put a standard of organizing. We're going to have a standard that everybody has to organize by, a way that everybody grades, but a way that there's cross help and there's cross, from if there's a big campaign, we can get people from the UAW, we can get people from whatever union that was,
Teamsters, yeah,
whoever,
exactly.
you know what I mean?
Right,
The thing about
right.
it is that, but we had to have a standard of how we approach organizing campaigns, and that's what Ben Singer and I put together, and it just wouldn't fly because of the thing about it is in unions is what brings them down is because there's so many decisions made by politics, internal politics.
Yes.
It's just like the steel workers, the district director who might have 2 or 3 or 4 states wants to bring in his people. He wants to bring in his people as favors, or if there's people out on strike, or if there's people who are laid off, he wants to bring those people in, not being trained because he finds favor with those local officers who will eventually vote for him to
Right.
continue to be a director.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Right.
so you're not getting the
Right.
the cream.
Look,
Yeah.
absolutely. You're bringing in. I'm bringing in Stefan because he helped me get elected.
Yeah.
He has no clue about. He has no training in organizing and doesn't know how to go about it. But this is what they do,
Right.
and they do this in all the unions. And this is where they're wrong.
Once again, there's no standards, it's political
Right.
Yeah.
favors.
No, I think the biggest mistake that the UAW made is that they're focused on the wrong area. Their focus has always been on trying to take on a transplant, the Japanese companies directly, and that's a mistake because you're not going to win. And what I'm about to say is not maybe giving them advice, but I want to say advice to the suppliers. If you want to attack the transplant companies like Japanese and Volkswagen, you have to hit the suppliers. That's where it is. To take on the major car companies, they're going to fail like they did time after time again. So my advice is now, if suppliers are listening, is that they should do some prep work right now. Take a good look what needs to be done. Talk to someone like ourselves who can offer the right advice for them how to stay non-union. But if the union was smart, they would go about it in a different approach. They're too focused on taking them head on, and they're not going to win head on.
Well, and it's just, maybe this is a bad way of putting it, but it's just like a cancer. It starts with one cell and then it spreads out. And that's how, traditionally, like I said, it's a bad way of putting it, but these are how unions win. I remember when I was a director, I used to tell whatever state I was in, I used to say, okay, let's pull out all the campaigns that we have and let's look at them. How bad did we lose? If we lost by only, okay, let's go back in there. Let's pull out all the companies that we represent that have, satellite plants or that, have, are in other states. Let's look at that because we already have a foothold in it. So it's going to make it a lot easier to organize and to get people on board. Where are the local unions around there? What kind of support do we have? What kind of, there's so many things one-on-one union organizing that they're just not doing. And it's good. It's good for management. It's good for us.
Great for management.
Yeah,
Well,
but once again, we're just kind of analyzing where unions are. They're going to get smarter than not because this is.
But I think
this is the future.
I think you're right. But I think Stefan has a valid point. The UAW they're going after such a monstrosity as Nissan. They're going after the numbers. Let's not kid anybody. It's about numbers. UAW lost what 1.3 million members since the late 70s, They've gone from 1.7 million to what, about 400,000 now.
400,000.
It's absolutely about numbers and money for them. So they're looking at the numbers. But I believe Stefan hit it on the head. It's about going after the suppliers first.
Stefan is right. He's spot on. I mean, the thing about it is you look at it, when we were there, and this is one thing that smart organizing departments look at, and this is what management needs to think about, is when I was with the unions and I was organizing director, we used to look at whether it be a company, industry, and say, okay, we were just like, inspectors from the state or county or the U.S. government. We would come and look at infrastructure, whether it be a bridge or thing. And what do they look for? They look for weaknesses, and that's the same thing that we looked at. We looked at companies, we looked at industries, we looked at, within regions or states or across country, and looked at what are the weaknesses of this company. What is the place where they're hardest, it's most difficult for them to defend, and then that's where we would attack. And you're spot on, Stefan, when you talk about the suppliers, because that is the weak link.
It is the weak link, and that's the thing that the car companies fear the most, because it's just like circling the wagons. If you get those other ones around you organized, then you can put more pressure onto the larger company. And that's the biggest fear of transplant companies, especially Japanese, because transplants like the Japanese that have the money and resources to put into a plant to defend itself. Smaller companies, suppliers, don't have that kind of money or support. And that's why it makes them so vulnerable. And the larger companies worry about that because that's their weak link and they know it. And many companies now are offering help to the suppliers, either prior to, or giving them money, or giving some advice, sending their HR people in, giving them different type of advice through consultants, because they know where their weak link is. And once that weak link gets purged, that puts more pressure on the car company.
And one of the things also that I know that we used to do, I mean, when I was with the unions, is that we could look at, when we were organizing suppliers, we could look at the numbers on the crates, and we could find out what plants they were going to. We could find out what departments they were going to.
Right.
And then we would be doing work with the locals of those plants. Mm-hmm. And sometimes things would disappear. Sometimes things would be damaged. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And when we could place parts with people, then we could get those people to work with us on, even though it was a different union, we could get them to work with us on communicating with those people. Well, wait a minute, you're part of the process, you're part of the arm. Why are you making, half what I'm making? And it starts getting those workers thinking, that's right. Why am I making so much less? I'm part of the process. We're sending the parts there. They're putting it on the assembly line, but we're the ones. Without us, there would be no assembly line. So I mean, it's another way that they're vulnerable, because they have the more connection. They have the both local is usually close by the plants.
Right.
They have the communication. So there's a lot of things that make the suppliers, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers vulnerable. And companies need to really think about that.
Yeah, I think what Stefan said about the transplants holds a lot of water, because one thing the unions do well is they understand historical data. And as we all know, the smaller the unit, the easier it is for them to get in and get into those small groups like Rick was talking about and have a successful campaign. So going after the suppliers is something that I'm sure we can all bet has been a topic of conversation behind closed doors at Solidarity House. The smaller the plant, the easier it is for them to get a hold on the workers, giving them a sense of ownership and getting them involved to the point where they can win a campaign.
Well, sure, Bobby. It's just like you said, the supplier. You go in and they come to you. They come to me when I was president of Local 174 and say, "Hey, look, we supply General Motors. We supply General Motors, but we're only making this, or we're only, so we're trying to. So we go in and try to help them, and we try to get the workers from the GM plant to say, hey." our little brother down here is making half what we're making, and they're the one making the product.
Right.
And that was where we tried to start from.
Well, absolutely. And if the UAW would have went down to Mississippi and started working on the suppliers first, see, that's the kink in the armor for Nissan is the suppliers, because they can affect the Nissan through the suppliers.
Sure,
Which
absolutely.
that's very surprising too, because one thing we know is that with BMW, that's exactly what they did. They went after the suppliers. Yeah, they had people talking to the folks at BMW, but they had the trucking companies, they had the tier one suppliers that are right around the plant, and that was their a prime target.
Sure.
And for some reason, they seem to switch gears on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then on top of that, going into another mistake.
Another? No,
Yeah,
no.
and I think it's fair to say that the campaign in Canton is not over, because they have filed 7 UOPs. The one thing that I want to hit on with the 7 UOPs is, even if the board were to say they're going to run a re-election, I really don't see them having much of a chance to win a second election.
The UAW is just, they've always tried to come off as being squeaky clean. You know, the Teamsters were the bad guys. They were the dirty guys. Let me tell you something. I came through the UAW, and it's both ways. It's over there. You just see this indictments coming down now about the theft of over $2 million, I believe, right now. That's all what they've said in training fund money.
Which, by the way, is the perfect excuse for the union to say this is why we lost. But go ahead.
Right. Oh, it's absolutely. If they want to be big boys and live up to it, they look and say it had nothing to do with it. It was our mistake. We made the mistake here. It had nothing to do with that. I mean, live up to it. Don't make excuses. But if I'm running the campaign against the UAW, I'm using it and looking. They're stealing union money.
Well, yeah.
I mean, so okay, here you guys. The UAW wants you to pay $40, $50, $60 a month, whatever it is, in dues. It's 2.5 hours now. So 2.5 hours of your pay is going to dues. Do you really know where it's going? So, I mean, here we have people, a former UAW vice president who's passed away a couple of years ago that was forced to retire because of things going on.
International vice president.
That's correct. International vice president. And you have more people that are going to be, their names are going to be revealed, but they're stealing money. And you don't want, UAW came out and said, well, there wasn't union money. Wait a minute. It is union money. Come on now. It's for training union people. It's for training. So don't tell me, apples and oranges here. It's still union money. They're stealing from you. They're stealing from the guy on the floor that's working his butt off to pay union dues, that doesn't get in trouble, doesn't use the union, but they're stealing his money.
Hey, Doug, tell me, what would your 7,000 members have done when you were president of your local if they found out that you were taking training money and said, well, it's not the UAW money anyway, it's for training,
Yeah, don't worry, guys. It had nothing to do with the UAW.
You would have been tarred and feathered.
Are you kidding me? Yeah, tarred and feathered is right. It's correct. And rightfully so. Yeah. Rightfully so. That is, I mean, I don't know how you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, well, it wasn't your union dues. Well, come on, really?
Yeah.
Really? You're stealing.
Yeah, and the stealing was both, and Stefan comes from the management side, and the same thing with management, Stefan. It was both, from management and from the union that were conceived this way of taking money.
Cohorts, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it happens. I mean, unfortunately, people are people, and they do wrong things.
Yeah.
But it seems to be more prevalent, and it has been on the union side lately. Teamsters have had some problems over the years. Now the UAW has had some problems. So it's important that people think about it, that you can't say it's training money. Where does the money all come from? All the money comes from employees' dues. So they just have a budget, and they allocate so much money to go in training, so much money to go into different parts of financing, investment, some kind of recruiting. So it's all employee money.
Right.
So it's stealing from the employee, and they have no say over it.
Well, and it's a double hit on the UAW, because management, they internalize it and they work with it, and you might have a couple people who go to jail, who are charged, who are fired. On the union side, the whole business is based on perception.
Correct.
Okay, do workers, do they have the perception that we can empower them? That we can, and I'm not talking about we, but them, when, the union can empower them. The union can, help make their life better. The union can further their progress, So it's a perception.
Sure.
And that's all it is. And it's who's smarter at that, who's better at, giving that perception to the workers, the ones who are going to vote, or the ones who are already in a union who may be thinking, well, maybe this is not such a good idea of us being in this union. Maybe we want to think about decertifying, whatever it is. But it's an ongoing fight that the unions have, that workers have to feel that they're better off with the union than they are without the union on their own. And if they're perceived to be crooks and not looking after the best interests of their own members, then it's gonna hurt them pretty bad.
So I see with the light of the indictment, I see the union, and tell me if I'm wrong, Rick, I see the union fighting for the members they currently have, fighting to keep decertifications from happening, and fighting rather hard at the negotiations table in order to keep those members. What do you think?
Well, they're going to do that, but and I've said this for the last couple of years. I think that it's not going to be too many more years in the future before the UAW merges with the steelworkers.
They're going to have to. By necessity.
Yeah, they've been talking, and people that I still know on the inside, that I knew when I was working with the unions, and who we still can, have a relationship. They say that there's internal conversations going on.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing going on with negotiations. And I know we wanted to talk about negotiations also. And we've all had some issues. I know, Doug, you've been on a worldwide or nationwide trip, a tour of negotiations, yes. And I know you've had some tricky situations that have come up with it, So
yeah, it's funny. It's weird working to one side, because it's very significant because I've worked both sides of the table, and it's really.
Well, can I ask you a question before you go on? I mean,
absolutely.
I know that you've been working with us for for some years now, yes. And I think that this is you've had a couple of cases. But how does it feel to go from negotiating for the union to now I mean, it has to be kind of interesting, because now you're looking at, okay, I know what he's going to say now.
Right.
I know his tactics are what's going to happen now. So you can see both sides of the coin. And I know, Stephan, you've done a lot of organizing also. But it's now being able to trump them on their own game.
It was great, Rick. It is great, because even before we go into a negotiation session, I would tell my management team what's going to happen, what they're going to say, what they're going to do. I know what they're thinking. I know what they're going to come back with. And we would go to a session, take a caucus, and they say, wow, you're right. They did exactly what you said.
And this is what they're doing right now. And this is what they're talking about right now as we're having this conversation. This is what they're going back.
Absolutely. It's great, because I tell the management, say, this is where they want to be at the end of the day. This is where they want to get. They'll be happy to get it. And they'll be and at the end of the day, they come back and say, yeah, you really did know where they were coming from. Absolutely. You know what? It's different from my vantage point now, because I know the numbers we're working with. I understand it, and I understand the direction that management wants to go. And when you get there, and the different unions that worked against on this negotiation tour, it's been really different. Has been really different, and they've come out real strong, saying that they're going to take them on strike. Yeah. And call their bluff, man, because it's a bluff. And you know what? And we backed several unions into a corner to where they had to retreat.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because you know what, the cost of going out on strike. I mean, let's face it, the cost. That's the worst thing. That's like if either they're going to line me up against the wall. I go on strike.
Right.
That's when I say I'm going to go on strike. It's a when they're calling the bluff, and 99% of the time they're calling. I mean, you have sometimes we've negotiated a lot of contracts that have gone on strike, and back when I was with the union, I negotiated a lot of contracts, and a lot of especially with legacy contracts, where we would be negotiating with the same management team when I was on the union side. All the time, and I remember we said, okay, this is what we want, this is what we're going to get, but we both have to, I have to keep my members happy and thinking that I'm fighting for them, and you have to keep, your bosses happy at management. So I mean, there was times I remember when members weren't happy, or satisfied with where it was going, and I used to tell a lawyer on the management side, I say, hey, listen, we're going to go in there and I'm going to pound my fist on the desk and we're going to do this,
Right.
we're going to do that, and then we're going to walk out and I'm going to cuss you out, don't take it personal.
Yeah.
I'll buy you a beer later on, and
Absolutely. You know what the funny part is, Rick. I've had management say, "Hey, look, this plant does not make money. Okay, we could close it, but we don't want to. We want to keep it going. But they're not making money. Has the company made money as a whole corporation? Yes, we have. However, this plant is not profitable." And we go in and we tell them right up front, hey, you guys are not profitable. But we want to keep you open. We
Right.
want to work with you.
Right.
And we would look and upper management would ask me and ask my opinion. I would have conference calls and they'd say, okay, Doug, what do you think if we let them go on strike? Well, look, I'm going to tell you from my perspective as a former union member, we don't want to be on strike because we're not getting it. If you get a strike pay, it's $150, $200 depending on the union, and your health care, everything stops day one. Because I have had the management say, hey, well, they're going to get health care till the end of the month. I said, oh no, they don't.
Now.
You cut them off right now.
That's right.
See,
That's
they
right.
didn't know this, and we have to educate the management,
Yeah.
and that's why they have us around to educate to help them. And I tell them, look, they're not going to go out once they miss a car payment, a house payment, rent. Look, the mama, the spouse is sitting at home saying, we have no money coming in.
The first check.
That's correct.
The first check. I remember when I was working on the Detroit newspaper strike way back in '95. I mean, 24, 25, 2,600, whatever it was, 100 people ran out, and you would have thought that they won the lottery.
Yes.
I mean, they were, all right, we're taking on the company like they won something. But you just walked out of your job, man.
Yeah, you walked out.
But when that first paycheck was due,
Right.
and those replacement workers were driving across the picket line showing you their check.
Yes.
That's when it came home.
Yeah,
And then nobody takes workers out on strike by telling them, hey, listen, it might last a year.
Right.
It's gonna be clear and
Yeah.
decisive, man, and we're gonna show them we're gonna be back and enjoy your few days off. No, it might be a year, it might be 2 years, it might be 3. And guess what? If they permanently replace you, who knows how long it's gonna be?
Right.
Nobody takes the workers out on strike, but bringing it to the reality. When you have a union that takes it seriously, I mean, when I remember when I was with the steelworkers and I was in the pattern bargaining with the steel pack, the company said we have to, in a very management in a very respectful and really serious way, said we cannot continue to do business like this. We have 35 classifications of workers. And all of them are doing specific things.
Correct.
We need the cross-train.
Right.
We agreed to it because, I mean, the union and the steel plants have been working together on a lot of things over the years. But they agreed to bring it down from 35 worker classifications to 5. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that really helped the steel mills continue to operate. I mean, because look at it. Automation. I mean, you're looking at a plant. I mean, they're doing more tonnage of steel now than they were 40 years ago, with 1/5 of the workforce.
Well, and that's true, and that's what in fact the UAW went to back in the late 90s, their contracts, and don't quote me, I know it was one of those contracts where the General Motors, Big Three, came out and said, hey, we have too many classifications. I was a skilled tradesman for General Motors. I would go on a job, I had to wait for an electrician to come, turn off the power, unplug a machine. I would have to wait for maybe a pipe fitter before I could start my job. You know how long you could sit up there for hours. So, the company said, hey, we can't afford this, man. We got to, so they did. They took the skilled trades and they made it pretty much a general, pretty much trade where, you know what, if it had to do with your job, I would go and I could unplug that machine. I could do the simple things to get my job done. And this is things, like you said, Rick, this is where management says, hey, we can be more productive, we can make more, therefore we can hire more.
Right, absolutely, or at least maintain the workforce.
Right.
Because with automation, I know remember the steel mills that we were negotiating with in the Chicago area, Bob, where we were working with management, and we were negotiating, and the CEO, I remember meeting with them before we went down there. And there's 3 steel mills, and 2 of them had contracts, and we were negotiating one. And the management says, we cannot do business like this anymore. We cannot. We're losing money. And we went down there, and it was a hard contract. It resulted in actually, the union taking us out on strike. We gave them the best and final offer. Unions took it on strike. And the other 2 plants, they staged wildcats because they had contracts. They weren't allowed to go out on strike, but they did anyways. So it turned into a 5-year battle where we eventually won, but we had to deal with a permanent workforce and all kinds of issues because we're dealing with the steel mills when they had other subcontractors that were in those steel mills, large steel mills, and who were constantly attacking the permanent replacement workers.
Exactly, and that was the same thing with companies that we work with now. They don't understand. They really don't. Although we do a great job in training, when it comes down to it for negotiations, say, hey, what's our options, Doug? And I lay out the options, like you said. You lay out the option. We can do a permanent replacement worker if it's a financial strike. Now, you know what? They go on strike and they say, well, how do we prove that? Well, you know what? We say they go on strike because they're financial. And you know what? They'll go to the board and let the lawyers fight it out, and they'll make the final decision whether it's either a financial or a non-financial strike.
Yeah.
And I said, well, we can do temporary replacement workers. And but we have options, and we have to let them know.
And that's why a good negotiator is going to make sure if there's a strike, it's going to be an economic strike and not a ULP strike.
Yes,
you know what I mean? It's not going to be a ULP. That's another thing also is that you have to when you with management when we're going in there and negotiating contracts. And I know me and you had a lot of conversations, Doug, as you toured the country. About making sure that we were precise and we were spot on all of our communication, whether it be written, verbal, whatever, and how we communicate. And it's very important to keep in control of those contract negotiations.
Yep. And we did that with this company. I was very clear, and with our training, we do not. We love that we don't have ULPs filed against us because we do things correctly. And I stayed on management and I said, don't do this and don't do that. And we were dealing with some pretty tough unions out there, and they did a good job and they listened. Therefore, I said, we don't want ULP charges out there. And as a company at PSLC, we are determined not to have ULP charges, and we not only train, but we embed it into the managements that we go into. And I'm proud of the fact that we don't have, and I didn't get a ULP charge against us in the contracts that I recently, within the last year, negotiated.
One of the biggest things that I see out there as far as mistakes goes is falling into the union trap for those ULPs. And a lot of people in management and HR, they know the textbook version of negotiations, but not the real world version of negotiations. And the unions know darn well what they're doing, when they bait the companies into committing these ULPs,
Well,
right?
yeah, and the thing about it is you can walk backwards into a strike. Remember that one contract we had a guy go down to not too far from the office here in Michigan,
Right.
where the president of the local, the Teamster local, was screaming and yelling and insulting people. I mean, the thing about it is that you have to have a professional discourse. You have to be able to talk professionally. You can't let it get to you. And if you get into that kind of arguing match, and that's what I'll phrase it as, an arguing match, and both sides become embedded into the position, you're not thinking clearly, and it can result into a strike, which is not good for anybody. But the thing about it is that, you have to be precise. You have to know the economics. You have to know exactly what you can and cannot do, and you have to educate and also is educating the union to let them know what you're capable of doing, just how
Right.
serious you are in your position.
Correct. And Stephen, I'm sorry, Stephen, but you're very adept, and you've done a lot of negotiations from the management side, so you understand the ULP.
Oh, I understand, but what I was going to say, whether it's your first negotiations or you're in several negotiations, most important thing is you have to do your prep work.
Yes.
You have to be ready.
Yes.
And understand
Yes.
and get ready for your contingencies. You have to understand your issues. You have to understand the union's issues. You have to sit with the proper people on the company side to set goals and objectives, because it's very important. If you don't set those, you can have a lot of problems. You also have to prepare for a strike, whether not that you want one, but
Right.
those preps have to be ready.
Right.
But you have to understand the committee. You should do bios on committee. Not only do you see who the leader is, but there's informal leaders. You have to know the issues that you're going into. You need to review past negotiations, see where you've been successful or unsuccessful. You have to look at grievances and arbitrations to see what possibly issues that can arise. You have to get your team ready, have them participate in maybe some mock negotiations, practice their roles, who does what, because that's important. Watching body language across the table is very important. What issues are key to certain people and how you may need to approach those. Economics is very important. You need to cost everything out ahead of time.
Yes.
If you don't have that costed, you don't know. And you have to have that company, in our case, we're representing a company, we have to have their financial person involved in that, because it's their numbers that represent. We can't come back later and say, oh, you said it was this cost. No, they have to figure the cost so you know where you're going with that. But I can't overemphasize preparations and your objectives and goals, because if you don't have that strategically set ahead of time, you're going to run into a lot of problems. Negotiations is a skill. You have to prep yourself for it. You have to be ready for it. You can't, as Rick mentioned earlier, some across the table try to be very boisterous and vocal to scare you into things. You have to carry demeanor. You have to respect everyone across the table, and it's important that we do that. But preparation, I can't overemphasize preparation.
Without prep, you're blind, man.
Without-
You're blind.
Without-
You're blind. And the
Yeah.
thing, and not just that, is that knowing all these things, all those things that you mentioned, is spot on, Stefan. Knowing all those things is knowing your workforce.
Absolutely.
And I can't-
Knowing your workforce. That's it, because they're the ones who are going to vote.
That's right.
They're the ones who are going to vote on it.
You're absolutely right, Rick. And when we did the preparation for these contracts, we just did the last 4 contracts. When I told the management, I said, no, we prep for negotiations. We want to be totally prepared. We want to know, as Stefan said, going into something, we're not jumping into something a week before. We have to have a contingency plan. And they would say, okay, what do you mean? I said, well, first of all, we're going to get together months in advance, and we're going to set up our goals. You guys tell me what you want as far as management. How far do you want to go? And let's set that, and then let's talk about it. Now let's talk about, like Stefan said, okay, what are we going to do if we come to a stalemate? Okay, they want to walk out. What do we want to do? Are we going to replace them? Are you going to let them walk out? Are you going to replace? Are you willing to replace them? So we need to have that. We need to have that in order to have a plan, and we need to know everything that's going on beforehand.
Right. And I think one of the most important things that Stefan said, I mean, it was all spot on, but I think one of the most important things that's many, many, many times is left out by management of contract preparations is the strike preparation.
That's very important.
And I tell you what, being in the past, being a strike director for the unions, when we got the call to take a local out on strike, our job was to damage the company, to get them to come back to the table and to give in to our demands.
Right.
That was it, and that doesn't happen without hurting the company. And that was, once that trigger was pulled, it was game on. Once that trigger was pulled, but whenever there was contract negotiations from the union side, we always made sure that we were ready to take it to them, as hard and as fast as we could. So management having that, and we tell management all the time, you got to be prepared. You have to be prepared. You can't just go in. Now you're coming up to where you're talking about a best and final. Where's your strike prep? Where's your, you have to have that. And we've
Right.
dealt with some companies over the past, years where we were exactly in that position where we had to say, okay, this is, we're going to work with you on preparing things. I mean, there's some big companies over the last couple of years that we had to walk in and we had to, put in the security teams. We had to, contingency plans, how we're going to get production, replacement workers, whether they were permanent or temporary workers, all the things that we had to bring in. And I think in our checklist is 150.
Well, and also, Rick, we also look at the area. We look where's that plant located?
Yeah.
Is it in a rural area? Are they going to go out and get jobs, part-time jobs to,
Right.
Or will they be able to? Or is it in a high-density union area? So we don't know. Well, these are things that we have to prepare the company
You
for.
customize it for the area.
For the area,
You have
yes,
to customize.
absolutely.
Everything is local. Everything is local. We have to prepare it. We have to investigate. We have to make sure that things, if the unforeseeable or the unthinkable happens, we're ready there on day one.
Well, look, I get why companies fail to have that strike prep done. I mean, it takes a couple of weeks really to get it done right. But the way I see it is if they end up with a union, that should be one of the initial things they do while they're negotiating that first contract. And then it's not going to change that much from day one. They might have to tweak it here or there, but it's definitely worth that investment. It does take time to figure out your weaknesses in security. It does take time to figure out how you're going to communicate and to build relationships with the different outlets in the media. But once you have it, you have it. And to me, it's just a shortcut to thinking, not to do it when you become unionized.
Well,
So many people don't do it. It's a shame.
Yeah, you're right, Bob. In fact, as soon as, you become organized, that's the time you should go ahead and start preparing for a strike plan.
And Stephen, you agree with me? It should be hand in hand.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't lag because at any given time during negotiation they may walk out on you too.
Well, think about this. One of the things Rick's always said to me, and it always sticks with me, is when he was on the union side, when somebody got unionized and they're entering the talks for the first contract, what was one of the first things that you did? You took a strike vote.
Always took a strike.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
when you go before you ever walk into contract negotiations, you take a strike vote, and you gotta have a strike vote because you have to put yourself in the strongest position when you go to the bargaining table.
Absolutely.
And the thing about it is, I didn't have to go back a year later and ask him for a strike vote. But you always do that. You always bring as much energy to the table as you possibly.
Right, and he always took that strike vote prior. And everybody's gung ho. They want to fight all the union members. And usually, I mean, you get if you get 95, 90, 99%. So you had and you always wanted to post the biggest, whether it be by percentage or by number.
Yeah.
Depending on that, I would have my committee post that when I was a union official. I would have my committee post that so management looked at that, and they said, 99% voted to strike.
Yeah.
So I wanted to put the pressure on management. So we're going into negotiation the following week with with the high numbers
Yeah.
in our favor.
Well, I didn't always post it, but I took a copy of it and I slammed it on the desk before before I said good morning.
Well, if the numbers were good, we always wanted to
Well,
post
the numbers
them.
were good, yeah. The numbers were bad, it never happened. Yeah.
Both you guys bring out, it's a psychological game.
It's
at
a
that
psychological
point.
game.
And the company has to go in saying, well, okay, we want 72 hours because we plan on running the plant.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways.
Yes,
But
yes.
you're letting the union know that we have all intentions of running our facility.
Yes, absolutely.
And, so it's part of the game.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think it's a bad word when you're saying game because it's very serious.
Yeah.
Right.
And you
Sure.
know, you're talking people's lives.
It's not a game, right? That's right.
Yeah, and people don't realize that when they first
No.
they're after to gain a union, that a lot of things happen if you vote a union in, and strikes is one of the.
Nobody wants to go through that. I mean, the management doesn't want them, the members to walk out. They want their workers to be there.
How many units did you have?
I had 80 plus,
80 plus units,
Yeah.
80 plus contracts.
almost 100 different contracts.
Okay, almost 100 different contracts, and once. And the thing about it is, it's not a game. But once you're in a position where you're looking down on it, you have to have to have an overview of all your contracts. You know, for the individual workers, it's very serious because it could be, you know, they're gonna have a roof to sleep under, or they're not gonna have a roof to sleep under. But,
Right.
But I just think that I think, you know, talking about everything that we've been talking about today, I think it's just very instrumental for management to understand what the other side is doing, to understand what the other side is thinking, and to take it, once again, when we talk about seriousness, take it very seriously what the unions are doing, because they always have their eye on you. You know, when I worked, and I'm sure you did also, Doug, but I know when I worked 20-odd years with unions, every day I woke up, regardless of what position I had at the time, I woke up every morning, and I tell management this, my job was the same job. It was to beat you. So it's important, and I'm talking to management. It's important that that management takes it seriously, protects themselves, educates themselves, and keeps constant. You know, keeps on top of things, on how to communicate with the people. I mean, once again, you know, preventing organizing campaigns is so simple. Treat your people right. Prior to the union knocking on your door,
right.
treat your people right, give them respect, give them a voice, and treat them fairly. And I think that's an important word, fairly, because everybody looks at that. Everybody wants to be treated fairly. Everybody wants to be heard. It's when they feel like they're not being heard. And once again, we're going to talk about perception. When they feel like they're not being heard, or they're not being respected, or and mainly they're not being treated fairly, is when they say, okay, we no longer have confidence in you. Now we're going to make a phone call to whether it be the UAW or the Teamsters or some other union. It doesn't really matter. But now we no longer have faith in you, and that's when you're losing it right there. Right. So if you treat your people with respect, you common courtesy, you know, keep them advised on what's happening with the company, within the company, give them a voice, and actually you want to do that because you know a lot of the problems are solved. You know, because from the people who are doing it on a day-to-day basis, it's a team effort, a true team effort, not just verbalizing that. It's a true team effort. Then you're never going to have problems with the union.
Well, sure. You have you have that ability, that one-on-one with an employee, where you don't have a third party, a union in there. I mean, Bob has a problem with Stefan, his boss, but he, instead of taking it on and talking to Stefan, be able to go into Stefan's office, now Bob's going to write a grievance. So now I can't discuss it with him now. Yeah. Now I have to find the committee man or steward, and I have to replace him, put somebody else on the job, or shut the job down.
Yeah.
And then Bob's going to come shut his job down. So management has to understand this, that we think that we push them to respect their employees, listen to the employees, listen to the worker, and keep that one-on-one. Don't shut the employee down.
And you know, I think Wenda, with this, the phrase I use all the time, if you want to stay union-free, you have to make union-free part of your corporate DNA.
Perfectly said, Rick. We got to wrap up now. So I want to thank Rick, Doug, and Stefan. We'll see you next time on PS Labor Talk.